Hello, everyone. I hope you're having a great day. It's Mary Maguire here, founder of Agents to Change and the author of The Inclusion Edge. So, today I want to talk to you about the four cornerstones of creating a sustainable diversity, equity, and inclusion strategy. Now, the last time I had a live, I had a little bit of a problem with my microphone. So if you are there and you hear me, just give me a thumbs up or let me know that you can hear me okay, so I don't have to go through it all and re-record again, which is what happened to me before. So a little bit about diversity, equity, and inclusion. So there's an awful lot of talk about this in business today. There's an awful lot of activity and investment in diversity and inclusion, and an awful lot of energy and time and resources are put to it. Yet I think that there's some real misunderstanding about A, why, and B, where to put that energy to get the best result. So let me start with the why. Quite apart from the things about just making a workplace more enjoyable, more inclusive, a place that people feel valued and heard and understood, um, you're going to find that you're going to have all sorts of upsides to diversity, equity, and inclusion, particularly the I bit, inclusion, because inclusion comes when you've done the work around diversity and equity. More on that on another live. So, where are we with this? So, first of all, there's been a lot of research about what are the benefits of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And what we know is that there is huge business benefits to this. One of the big ones is that we find that there's better business performance, and that's in three particular areas. There's more than this, but there's three particular areas. So this is the why. The first one has to do with staffing. Now, staff costs for almost all businesses, not all, is the biggest cost of their balance sheet. And the costs come not only in bringing people in and paying them, but also the loss of people and replacement costs as well. So if we can create a staff base that is stable, that grows with the organisation, so the knowledge is retained in it and stays over a longer period of time, therefore the replacement costs are lower, we start to see a huge difference in the overall cost for the company. The second one we know is also to do with the performance of the company in terms of their inherent processes or services. So we find that organisations that are more diverse have more innovation. They have better research and development and shorter timescales, shorter learning scales, and they're usually quicker to market. Now, why is this? Again, there's another short live coming for this further down the road. But one of the reasons for this is that once we bring people from very different backgrounds together, very different thinking styles, very different ways of seeing things, they tend to get to solutions and ways of working quicker than actually if we've got a group which is all the same, all from the same culture, all from the same way of thinking. Because if we don't have that diversity in, we are going to have the same tried and tested approach, which usually means a longer learning curve and a flatter learning curve. And it also means that we're usually much more conservative in taking risks as well. And then the third one to do with this is to do with often when people invest, when organisations invest much wider in their diversity, equity, and inclusion, they start to think about not only inside the company, but who are they dealing with? Who are the communities out there that they're interacting with? Who are their suppliers? Who are the people in their supply chain? And once they start to open that up to more diverse suppliers, more diverse partnerships, they often find that it actually helps with that innovation cycle that I've talked about, but it often reduces costs as well. Working with more diverse suppliers who are usually working on a smaller scale, who are more agile to your needs, usually have a much lower cost base, usually reflects a much lower overall purchasing cost as well. So that's 3 reasons for the why, but that's not what we're going to cover today. So what I wanted to cover today is where are the 4 places that your energy needs to go to make sure your diversity, equity, and inclusion strategy is sustainable over the long term. And they may seem obvious, but it's amazing how many organisations I've worked with where they either seem to invest in none of these or only have a singular focus on one or maybe 2 of them, and then find that their energy and their momentum over time dissipates, and therefore the returns that they get over time dissipates as well. So let me go through them. So the first one may seem obvious, but it's amazing how many organisations don't do that, and that's vision. And what I mean by that, when I line it up appropriately with the camera, is particularly a vision around diversity, equity, and inclusion. So if we think about vision, a vision is a mental picture of where we want to get in a future time period when we have actually put investment in. So that future time period will tell us what our state is going to look like. What is our new worldview going to look like? What are going to be the things around us that are changed? What are the things that are going to have changed within our organisation, within ourselves? Now, organisations, almost all organisations, there's the odd ones that don't, but almost all organisations have a very clear vision. What is it we're about? What is it we're aiming to achieve? What is it we want to be known for? So they have that vision. And here's where I think something happens is sometimes when they have that vision, they they think that that will be enough to put it as an overall umbrella for where diversity and equity inclusion strategy sits. But often it doesn't, because we're trying to do 2 different things. One of them is the overall direction of the business in terms of the systems, processes, people, and the overall impact on its marketplace and its community. But diversity, equity, and inclusion strategy is very specific to how you're going to create an environment, a business of belonging, if you like, in how you actually bring your people on, how you support them, how you look after them, how you develop them inside the organisation, and also the values that you portray in the ecosystem that you're operating in as well. So it's important to think about investing time in that DE&I vision. And that should be a vision that should at least pull you 4 to 5 years in the future. Could be longer, but certainly 4 to 5 years. We need enough stretch for people to feel that there's going to be a momentum pulling them forward. We're going to be talking about momentum soon. So the vision needs to be there. And here's another thing that's really important. It needs to be encompassing enough that any person in any part of the organisation can see it, understand it, and feel involved in that vision. So if we've got a singular vision, which is purely about one diverse group and addressing that, all great, but that becomes a goal rather than a vision. The vision should be all encompassing around the wide spectrum of diverse traits in the organisation and how this organisation is going to represent them in the future. And it doesn't need to be a huge amount of work. We often think vision work can be, very hard going. But it does involve conversations. It does involve bringing people from different parts of the organisation with different lived experiences, with different diverse traits, to actually talk about if we had the most inclusive, the most diverse organisation in the world, in our market, what would that look like to us? What would that vision be? And what I found is it often only takes 2 or 3 really good conversations with a cross section of your population to get to a really meaningful vision. And these are quite short, these are like pithy statements, but they really get what it is you want to hang your hat on or hang your D&I strategy on for a multi-year period. So start with vision. So once you've got a vision, again, what's important is not rush to action straight away. And again, I've seen a lot of organisations do this is, right, we need to get on and we need to start doing things now. And we need to start telling people about what we're going to do and why it's important. That's all good stuff. But I just suggest that you take a breath at that point and do something else instead. And that is to actually think about what are the gaps, get my video, what are the gaps that we have in our organisation that's getting in the way of us being a diverse, inclusive organisation that has a culture of belonging. And really, what I'm talking about with the gaps is really understanding it from a data perspective. So, data is really essential. Data tells us so much about what's going on. So, understand your baseline before you start the action. So, where would you go for that data? Well, there's a huge amount in most organisations that you can already start with. So think about it in terms of your staff database. So whatever your employee database is, and most line managers and senior managers have access to that and can pull down reports. You start to pull down things that tell you something about your populations and where they're located. And here's the thing, when you start using data, it's really important to have some core questions in mind, only 3 or 4. So it might be, do we have a difference in gender based on geography, based on level, based on the business unit? And start looking at data from that perspective. Do we have age differentials across different levels of the organisation? And do we have particular age gaps or age concentrations that tell us something about what might be going on there? Now, where it gets a bit harder is if you want to drill down into other data, but it's not impossible, and there may be other ways to do it. It might be then you have some core questions about, do we have representation across ethnic, racial groups that are comparable with our overall community? And again, looking at, can we actually see that across levels? Can we see that across business units? Can we see that across geographies? Now, some of that data may be available. So North America, for example, will have that data. Europe is more tricky to gather that data, not impossible. And then you can start thinking about, well, what are the other diverse traits and is there information I can find about them? So what about people with physical disability? What about people who have neurodiversity? Do we know anything about them people, either in the databases or what is known in our community about these people and where are they located and what's the levels that they're at? So that's already a good set of data that gives you some idea of what might be going on. And it helps you to understand where we have, a very undiverse communities and employee groups. We can ask questions about, is that because we have some inherent bias in either the way that we define the roles for these jobs, the way that we recruit for these jobs, or even some bias in the managers who lead them teams? So it helps us to maybe get a bit further down. Other places you can look for information and you can overlay this is in things like your employee engagement surveys, which tell you an awful lot about how people are feeling, their general sentiment about their employment with you. And you can then overlay that with the information you've got around populations and geographic business unit or other or groups. And then the other thing you can think about is your general data of movement of staff. So thinking about your employee groups across the whole life cycle of their time with you. So from the time that you're recruiting, the time that you're developing, promoting, and then they're exiting the organisation. If you chop that data across them, again, can you find some interesting things? Now that sounds like a lot of work, but there is a fair bit of work in there. But as I said, your organisation will already have a lot of data almost all organisations collect an awful lot of data now. So it's more taking the time to invest in that and maybe getting some help from the analysts in your organisation to help start cutting it in a way that's really drilling down into some of these questions, which will help you to understand what's going on. Because once you've got that gap, once you understand it, you can then understand what your next step is and what your priorities are. And when you've got them, you can then put in some of the cornerstones of the strategy. And some of the cornerstones of your strategy will be the vision, will be understanding the data and some of the needs, and then it will be looking at the governance of your diversity and equity and inclusion strategy. Because if we don't have governance across the strategy, it doesn't happen. So, what's that governance look like from representations at a senior level? And then the bit, which again, getting it going year on year and supporting it is the bit, again, organisations struggle with, is the engagement. And the engagement is thinking about all across your employee groups and your employee populations, how are you telling them about your commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion? So you've probably had the vision, and you've probably shared the vision with them. There's probably a strategy, and there's sharing of that strategy and what that looks like. But there's other things that you can do as well. So one of the things that's very popular in modern organisations now is developing affinity groups. Affinity groups or employee resource groups usually help people who identify in a particular group to actually get together, talk through their experience, support each other, have some informal support and allyship and mentoring going on, but also can be a resource for the organisation to review policy and help to bring in improvements that address their needs. So that can be across gender, it can be across parental status, it can be across racial or ethnic groups, it can be across LGBTQ plus groups, physical disability, neurodiversity, and so on and so on. It depends how large your organisation is. But these groups would get together probably monthly. They might have a topic they talk about, they might even invite a guest in, or they might just be getting together and generally talking about how they are. But having that level of engagement becomes a bit of a oil for the engine, if you like, of engagement. But that's not where it needs to start. What's really important engagement is something filters down from the very senior level of the organisation all the way through the leadership and management tiers that has a regular conversation going on around diversity, equity and inclusion. And there's different ways that you can do that. That might be something to do with some integral goals for the organisation that are then, if there's dashboards shared on a regular basis, it's included in there. It might be through the people dashboards that are shared with senior level leaders, and then they share and cascade that and share their thoughts and their expectations with that. It might be things like an award ceremony that actually really showcases people who are doing inclusion work really well and why you want to praise that, or some other things that are some other activities. It might be to do with awards for an employee affinity group about some of the particular work that they've done. And then other things that you can think about doing are just general things like, we know celebrating world days like World Autism Day and International Women's Day and Gay Pride are happening on a more regular basis now, and they're great. But it could be more small level stuff. So even down at a team level, if once a month somebody brings in something, maybe it could be some food or an item or something from their life that actually shares a story about their culture and their experience, and something that actually really resonates with their identity. And that doesn't need to be a big thing. It may be a 15 or 20-minute conversation through a working lunch, either in person or over Zoom, where you're actually just sharing ideas. But the most important part is engagement needs to be multi-year. That means investment. It means investment in your employee affinity groups, giving them resources, giving them annual budgets, making sure that they've got direct links to the senior level organisation through your governance groups, and that they can actually have this two-way conversation, that they're hearing what's coming down from the senior level, but they're sharing feedback and also contributing to more inclusive, more open, more diverse policies, procedures and ways of working. And then the engagement in terms of the communication needs to be consistent throughout the year about how your DE&I strategy is contributing to your overall business priorities, so people understand it is part of the fabric of the organisation. So that's the third one. So the final one, which sort of ties it all together, and again, you'll know this, but it's amazing how much we don't do it, is momentum. So how do we keep things going after we've got through the first big year or 2 years and the fanfare of we're doing this and this is really important to us? How do we keep the momentum going over the long term? And there's a number of things you need to think about. So the first one I've mentioned is you need to have a fairly solid governance approach. And typically organisations, what they do is they bring business leaders from different parts of the organisation together and ask them to create some sort of DE&I steering group or council or some other body like that. But they need to be people who have the ear of the most senior people in the organisation and the board where necessary, but also are connected to the senior and middle managers in their own business areas. So they have this a way to understand from a strategic perspective how DE&I fits into the overall strategy, but also have the power, influence and status to be able to address barriers that exist in the organisation, whether they're structural barriers in the way that the organisation is run, or whether they're just things like resource barriers. But they're people who can actually lean into things and actually help to get things done. So it's very important to have that at a senior level and see it as something that's important and is wedded to the overall performance of the organisation. So as well as that, to keep momentum going, I've already talked about the employee resource groups. You need to think about multi-year funding as well. Many organisations put in a pot of money to get things started in the first year, and then put in a number of foundations, and then they squeeze each year less and less and less into that budget. And usually by year 3, there's very little funding going in. And energy goes where the money goes. So if the budget isn't there, if the organisation isn't seeing this as an important area to invest in, nobody else will as well, because it is tied so much to the overall goals of the organisation. And then the third part of it is to be transparent in terms of the goals, multi-year, because you've got, as I've suggested, you have a multi-year vision, and publish them on a regular basis. With your employee groups, ideally a quarterly dashboard should be published to show where you are in your overall goals, what's been happening in the quarter, what's actually coming up in the following quarter, and why it's important. And then with your external stakeholders, so your shareholders and your other investors and your partners and your suppliers, they should be seeing a regular report which is saying, what are we doing in this area? What have we invested in so far? What's our approach for the following year? Because again, just like resources are really important, accountability is the one thing that drives the behaviour of your senior leadership. So the more transparent that is in terms of your goals, including when you've hit issues and you haven't hit your goals, shouldn't be fluffed. It should be acknowledged why they haven't been hit and what you're going to do about them. And it's okay to re-baseline. Sometimes, and I've known many organisations, they start off with rose-tinted glasses, they put out some very, very big goals, and lo and behold, they find halfway through the year they know they're not going to achieve them. So explaining we didn't achieve them, we've re-baselining it, as in we've reduced the target or we've changed the targets because we need an enabler first, is fine. And people get that. People know we have to change. So, in summary, if you want your multi-year strategy for DE&I to work, remember then 4 areas. So be clear on your vision and make it multi-year. Be clear on your gaps, particularly around your data, by going into the data first and understanding where you are. Put in the energy and time to engage across your organisation and all the way through the organisation. So certain organisations have what they call hard to reach groups, either because they're on shift work and they're not tied up into a company computer or monitor on a regular basis, and or they work in some sort of manufacturing or warehousing or some other thing. So remember that the engagement needs to go all the way down, and you need to think about these hard to reach groups because they tend to be the people who ideally you want to most touch the feeling of the DE&I strategy working. Then you need to think about your momentum, thinking about it as a long-term journey. Think about the investment that you're going to make over the long term. Think about a strong governance. Think about having the oil in the engine of your employee affinity groups, and also the accountability. Be transparent about what you're achieving, where it's going well, where you're hitting challenges, what you're going to do about them challenges. And if you do all that, I can assure you, you will have a sustainable DE&I strategy over the long term. So I hope you found that useful. I'll be back in about 2 weeks and I'll be talking about some of the work we can do on a behavioural basis around DE&I. If you'd like to know more, please IM me on whichever platform you might be looking at me on. You can email me, mary@agents2change.com. That's the number 2 in the middle, agents2change.com. And I'd be delighted to talk through things. Even if you just want a free chat to just talk about where you are, especially if you're early in the journey and you want to just get some ideas, I'm happy to give you a short amount of my time if you want to invest a bit of yours and help you with that. So I'm wishing you a great day. I want to thank you very much for your time and all the very best with your long-term DE&I strategy.